And then he said the beings that came out had on the left side of the chest an emblem, a winged serpent. Now Herbert Schirmer was either telling the truth or he was telling a lie. Others have said the insignia of the flying serpent was on the chest of these beings that came out of the UFOs. Now in Isaiah, the 30th chapter in the 6th verse, we read these words, "The burden of the beast of the south, into the land of trouble and anguish, from whence come the young and the old lion, the viper and the fiery flying serpent." This is speaking of Egypt. Now it's interesting to take a trip to Egypt and see if we could find a fiery flying serpent. On the northern part of Egypt are the great pyramids of Giza. And as we go up the Nile to central Egypt, we come to the Valley of the Dead, a place that is called the Valley of the Kings, the Queens, and the Nobles as well. The Nile is the lifeblood of Egypt. Without the Nile, there would be no Egypt. Much of Egypt is like it was centuries ago, yea, even thousands of years ago. They have not changed their ways. As we enter the western side of the Nile, the side that is called the Valley of the Dead, we find temples and tombs. The ancient Egyptians believed that the sun died every afternoon and it came to life every morning. As we go into the tombs of Egypt, we find that the Egyptians lit those tombs with 12 to 14 mirrors in the ancient times. They also demonstrated to people that visit there today. This Egyptian gentleman is reflecting the light that came from the entrance of the tomb off a mirror. He bounced that light off the wall, and we see winged serpents. Just like the Bible says, there would be fiery flying serpents in Egypt. No one can deny that these are not winged serpents, snakes with wings. But why snakes with wings, when there is no such thing as a snake with wings today? Yet we find them throughout Egypt. When the winged serpents have legs on them, they called them dragons. But there is no such thing as a dragon today. They also painted them on their caskets. And they not only painted them on their caskets, they carved them on their caskets with an undulating body that went the full length of the casket. This represented the immortality of the soul. The ancient Egyptians believed that when they died, their spirit and souls would live on. In central Egypt, we find a very famous valley called the Valley of the Kings. It was here that a famous boy king was buried by the name of King Tut. The western side of the Nile was called the Valley of the Dead. It is a dry, rock-strewn land where the tombs of the dead pharaohs were secreted. King Tutankhamun was a minor king who, it was said, died of tuberculosis at the age of 18 or 19 in the year 1344 BC. If you go to Egypt today, to the tomb of King Tut, you will see this stairway. Imagine what it was like on November 26, 1922. An archaeologist named Howard Carter pulled away the first stone, revealing the interior of that tomb that was secreted for over 3,000 years. As Howard Carter gazed at the treasures in that tomb, it must have seemed that other eyes were looking at him as well. Eyes that were shrouded in darkness for well over 3,000 years. This was one of the greatest archaeological finds in history, the discovery of King Tutankhamun's tomb on November 26, 1922. This is what Howard Carter first saw as he entered that tomb. It seemed that grave robbers must have tried to rob some of the jewels and treasures of that tomb, but probably were discovered and undoubtedly put to death, and the tomb was sealed once again. We see strange creatures in that tomb, but one of the greatest finds in that tomb was behind a great sealed door. Within that sealed door, Howard Carter discovered the casket of King Tutankhamun. We can only imagine what went through the mind of Howard Carter when they first lifted the lid from this huge casket in this tomb. This is a picture of Howard Carter carefully brushing away the dust of 3,000 years on the outermost casket that covered King Tut. It's interesting to notice that there were 3 caskets over the body of this boy king. The popes of Rome have 3 caskets over their bodies as well. This is the head of the outermost casket of King Tut. When Howard Carter saw this head of gold, he shone his light on the face, and he saw the tremendous art of the ancient Egyptian trying to preserve the features of the pharaoh, so the spirit and soul, the Ba and the Ka, could recognize that body as they came back into that body once again. This was all built around the teaching of the immortality of the soul. After removing the first casket, Howard Carter saw a second casket, also showing the features of the boy king as he would look in later years. But the most fabulous find of those 3 caskets was the innermost casket. The innermost casket weighed 2,448 1/8 pounds of solid gold. The head that we see here weighed over 900 pounds of solid gold. The headdress was made in the form of a hooded serpent. King Tut was worshipped as the son of the sun god on earth. The gold on the head of the innermost casket was so bright that when they touched it, it lost some of its luster. There were many artifacts that were discovered in King Tut's tomb. One of these artifacts pictures King Tut on his chariot with a winged serpent behind him. This winged serpent seems to be acting as a protector for the Pharaoh of Egypt. But why did the ancient Egyptians use a winged serpent as a protector? One of the most outstanding finds in King Tut's tomb was his golden throne. The armrests on this throne are in the form of 2 winged serpents. The pharaohs of Egypt were worshipped as the son of the sun god on earth, or the life giver. The winged serpents acted as covering cherubs for the pharaoh. But they didn't do much good for King Tut, because he was murdered as a young man. Here we have King Tut as the life giver with 2 winged serpents on either side acting as covering cherubs. As we study the ancient cultures, we find that winged serpents acted as covering cherubs or protectors of the ruling monarchs. Osiris was one of the supreme gods of ancient Egypt. He was called the many-eyed god. Here we see a winged serpent over the god Osiris acting as a covering cherub. Notice this picture carefully. We will refer to it again toward the end of our study. Winged serpents as covering cherubs can be found all over this world. 2 stylized winged serpents were in front of a box-like affair as well. These were called the divine serpents by the ancient Egyptians. The art of ancient Egypt was a counterfeit of God's truth.